Yeah, good afternoon. I'm sorry that I'm not Alistair Stewart, who's paid a lot more than me, is better known and maybe better looking. I don't know. That's for you to decide. But my name's Joe Confino. I'm an executive editor of The Guardian. I ran a project in Uganda called Katine, which we've been following for 4 years. It's an integrated development project. Set up the Global Development website last year, and also I run 2 other websites called Guardian Sustainable Business, and a new one we've just launched last week, called Better Business, which is all around progressive business. And when I was asked to do this, I looked at it and I thought, it's really interesting. This is a fascinating project because it cuts across all those areas. It cuts across NGO relationships with business. It cuts across NGOs versus sort of for-profit business. It just cuts across that whole area. And I know that, any project, you can look at it from many angles. So some will see this as a wonderful project because it's allowing poor women to actually create their own livelihoods, which, as we know, you can give health, you can give education, you can give sanitation or water, but actually what creates change over the long term is livelihoods. And then other people will say that that care is supping with the devil. Because actually all it's doing is doing the work of the multinationals for them, which is actually getting products that are unnecessary, unneeded, and getting poor people to sell it to poor people so that actually they don't have to do the business for themselves. So there are lots of ways we can look at this, and one of the things I'd like to do in this session is to look at those, and actually, is there an integration? Can we all come to a decision about which one we think it is? So I wanted to be reasonably interactive. I haven't had a chance to do any work on preparation, which is wonderful, because actually I will learn the same speed as you. So I'm going to start with Nick. Now, Nick Southern runs Care Bangladesh, and I think it'd be really useful to have 1 minute or so, because we'll try and keep things moving along quite quickly, saying what actually is JITA and what's the journey been, and then we'll start talking about the pros and cons on it.
Okay.
So, Nick.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick Southern from Care, but I am also now the chairman of this new for-profit business, which is called JITA. The journey, I think Helene alluded to it a little, it started some years ago as a fairly classical sort of project, looking at engaging extremely poor women in rural Bangladesh with products, with the market, with products that would be beneficial for them. But particularly our first interest was at the women themselves, as you say, selling and earning a commission on those sales. So it started from that base. We started to look at expanding that opportunity for those women, increasing the actual items for sale, and looking at establishing, multiple connections with market. As it has changed, and on the 1st of January this year, 2012, it became a for-profit business. But in this last 2011, we came to a point where we had a successful sales program that was actually had 2,500, just to give you some facts and figures, 2,500 women sales agents selling and engaging with roughly about 1 million community people, rural, extremely poor communities in Bangladesh. This is where we are from a geography point of view. In a lot of Bangladesh is very poor, but these are particularly poor communities. And particularly in those communities, women are the clients for the business. They are the people who we, as now called JITA, engage with and buy and sell products that they need. Now, these products are, from our point of view, health and nutrition and hygiene products. There are some other products like telephone time on the local mobile network there. It's called Grameen. But also there are 1 or 2 other products which you can buy. To look at this progressive business from a business point of view, we sat down and created with our partners and our investors Care Enterprises. Care Enterprises, Bangladesh, established on the 1st of January the limited company, JITA, to continue to build that business from 2,500 sale agents, about 1 million customers. And our goal in the next 3 to 4 years is to have about 12,000 sale agents working through a hub and spoke system, which we'll speak a little more of later, and reaching perhaps up to about 10 million people in rural Bangladesh.
So you talked about a basket of products with most being health-related, which you say are positive. What's the one you're most embarrassed by? That is being sold?
The one your newspaper wrote about recently.
Which one was that?
That was Unilever's. We can speak to this issue more generally. There was not a blog, but an article by a journalist from the Guardian newspaper who came with Care.
I didn't read that one.
Oh, you've not read this?
No.
Okay.
I told you I've done no preparation.
Okay,
I'll read it
no,
afterwards.
you must read it later. You can blog on this later.
It's old news.
In Asia, there are a number of products which are sold not just by Unilever but by other manufacturers that relate to skin creams and creams that you use for baby oils or for moisturizing agents. Some of these products are promoted as they're suggested that they have a whitening product. They have a whitening capability, right? Proven or otherwise, they are often irresponsibly marketed in that way, right? One of these products that's in that basket has that shadow falling over it, actually.
Okay, and
but it also is very popular in Southeast Asia and East Asia.
So and we'll come to lots of issues, but just stick with that issue for a moment, because that is one of the problems, isn't it? One of the ones you raised in your 7 moral dilemmas or whatever, which is the fact that there's no reason why a consumer or a citizen or whatever we want to call them, who's poor, shouldn't be able to buy things that they feel are nice to have and maybe even a luxury product. But the fact is, isn't there a risk, though, that in the basket of things, you're selling, so you need soap and you need things, but you don't need all of those things. And actually you're creating, by having, I think you do yogurts and stuff like that with sort of positive properties, but actually those aren't core to what their lives are, and actually you're encouraging a market of consumer goods buying that actually some people won't be able to afford, and actually aren't you creating the very problem that you're trying to solve?
May I just continue? Yeah, because Linda will speak to this.
No, everyone's going to get a chance. I'm just going to have a good kicking,
I think,
and then we'll move on.
One of the aspects of the work we're doing is that very issue, is the actual ethical matters around trading products for sale to communities who are not used to working with a market that has integrity. Right? If you are in Bangladesh, if you can reach the market at all, then that market is often is not and has not worked with any integrity, including selling, products which are not what it says on the label or whatever. I think to back up that question is your concern, right? You're expressing, right? I think the issue at the centre of this is actually for people themselves to see themselves. And I heard it this morning in the opening plenary sessions, actually, talking about people's emancipation, people's sense of personal integrity, personal dignity, people's sense of self, right? And how actually people like ourselves, myself and the organisation I work with, we are not here to tell people what to do and what choices to make. We are here to connect people with a way of expressing themselves and their own desires for their present and their future, and to make informed choices. Right? Now, do they always make informed choices? Would be another issue.
Okay, and just finally, because I will move on, but just finally, isn't there the risk, though, that what we've seen, and I'm not comparing directly, but what we've seen in the West is that actually that that we've come to represent ourselves through our materialism, and actually we're trying to move in the other direction, that we're saying actually we've defined ourselves too far by what we own rather than who we are, and isn't there the risk that we're starting to actually create damage in that way as well?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a complex...
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, Gavin. I'm not saying it is, it's a question.
There's another much bigger risk, and this is having people deprived of choices, deprived of a range of products. I completely agree with Nick about not setting ourselves up as moral arbiters. If I want to buy a tanning cream, if I want to make my skin darker, I would be really object to Care or anybody else, and I wouldn't regard it as Care's job. I might regard it as the government's job to provide me with information about the health risks or benefits of different products. But I think you've got to balance the costs and the benefits, and the costs and the benefits of people staying as they are, women living in their houses, having to, the only way they can make purchases is through their husband. That's no choice, never going out against what this project is offering them, which is an umbilical cord to the outside world, as Nick says, treating them as subjects, as partners in their own development rather than objects of charity. There's all sorts of ways.
So Linda, you've done a lot of research.
Yeah.
So what?
Good to
Yeah.
kind of look a little bit more at the broader scope.
Well, that's what we're going to do now.
And to focus also on some of the benefits which you raised, which are considerable. The Saïd School has had a small team in Bangladesh studying this system since early 2008. Today we're releasing two pieces of work around that. Most of our funding has been jointly from the Saïd Foundation and from CARE, in fact. But we also have had significant funding from the CARES Foundation, and their representative is present today as well. There are two pieces. One is a very detailed business case that was written by my colleague, Catherine Dolan, who's here in the front row, so you can ask her questions afterwards. This is a very detailed case, so for those of you who might want to put some of this into practice, I strongly recommend that you pick it up. We have some of them at the front and some at the back. It tells in quite a bit of detail the story of how this came about, mistakes that were made, things that were tried, things that failed, and it also gives the growth rates in terms of the income for the women, the number of women in the system, and even sales figures. There is also a piece that is being published by Gender and Development, which is also led by Catherine Dolan, that is also in this packet. And what it focuses on are the impacts on the women. And the benefits to the women of this system are surprising and considerable. And many of them are focused on gender empowerment issues, which is frankly the reason we went in there in the first place, is that we were interested in the gender impact. And so those are, some of them are surprising. One of them is the fact that these women, the women who were consumers, are basically not allowed to leave the house by themselves. They have no way of buying even their own clothes. One of the effects that's been observed is that the color of the clothes in the rural sales program systems has changed because the women can choose their own. It's a really, it's significant. That's one thing that might get lost. The other thing that I'm concerned is getting lost here is that our research, and we've interviewed 125 women. We have about 200 hours of videography that still isn't completely analyzed yet. We've also gotten the business data from CARE and from suppliers, so it's really quite a bit of information. And one of the things that we found was that approximately 2/3 of the women in this system sell locally produced goods. Okay, so baked items, embroidered saris, things like this. And they also sell stuff that they pick up on their own that is not put into the basket by CARE. And that is quite a surprising range of stuff. Okay, but we don't have any way of counting that. Okay, so that the actual income to them and the actual earning power of this system And the economic generation that's possible through this system by providing a distribution channel for local goods to be traded is not even captured. All right, so I was just concerned we'd get so focused on
No,
that we would lose all the rest of that.
No, we're not going to lose anything. Don't you worry, it's fine.
Okay, but everybody pick up one of these.
Okay, but just to push that forward, so here's one example which you've focused on. If you were to spread that as a sort of methodology, what do you think the impact could be if it was actually, really expanded and so actually, went to sort of scale? What would that look like? What could be achieved?
What kind of outcome do you mean?
The outcome, so taking the success of this and actually scaling it up and
Yes,
spreading it,
yes.
what could the impact be of making that across sort of Africa or
Okay,
across...
are you talking about a consumer impact or the
No,
impact
I'm
of
talking
the
about
women?
I'm talking about the development impact, the positive development impact.
Okay, well, I think there would be multiple potentials. One of the things that we're very concerned with and that we've been talking to Nick especially about for a while is that we have a new proposal in development for a big study that is designed to measure the consumer impact and the enterprise impact, primarily the consumer impact. And so this would be things like effects on the environment, it would be effects on the women who buy as well as who sell, materialism, measures of materialism, things like this. So that aspect of the development here I think is unknown. And I think it is unknown for systems of this sort right around the world and needs to be done. This is research that is burning and that nobody is doing. Okay, but as far as the other kinds of impacts, I think it would be very hard to quantify at this point, but I think we know that economic empowerment of women, if we can put money in the hands of women, it has a multiplier effect that is quite considerable. And the data that we have indicates that these women are not only earning quite a bit more money than other programs can provide them, but they're doing things like taking over the household decision making, which is pretty great in a conservative Muslim country.
And just finally before I move on, in terms of, there's always new schemes being tested, and we see some positive outcomes very quickly sometimes, but also there's the whole issue of unintended consequences.
Right.
So I know you don't have data, I know you haven't done the research, so I'm asking you to just go out a bit of maybe your normal field, but what's your biggest concern from seeing what you're seeing? So you say there's lots of potential. What's the biggest concern of what an unintended consequence of this might be?
I think you're going to be surprised at this. I think the unintended consequence, in fact, you're absolutely right that many systems get a lot of flash and trash real early on, and I can name some big names, okay, that have since failed or stalled out, right? And one of the reasons that we are announcing where we are in time is that this system has already been in place since 2005. Okay, and so it is showing some stability and some growth potential that has not been replicated elsewhere. And part of that has to do with the balanced basket of goods that allows it to be sturdier than other systems. Okay, so that's one thing. But the biggest concern that I have, honestly, is that there will be so much unintended consequence. There will be so much pressure from the world community. There'll be so much pressure on CARE to scale this system up too fast. Because one of the reasons it's strong is it has been very carefully, very compassionately and closely managed. That it will be scaled up so fast that it will completely spin out everywhere else it's tried. That's my biggest problem.
So quite interestingly, so in our project in Uganda, CARE, as part of the project, CARE and Barclays were working together on village savings and loans. And that's a danger there too, that it's fantastically successful. People love it so much that it's just going whoosh. And the risk is then the methodology gets diminished, and then abuse comes in, and then people take advantage, and power structures come in. So that's what you're talking about. Yes,
it's really that. If I can just add on, one thing is not only an issue of just the speed of the scale up, is that we don't know what things about Bangladesh may be unique to Bangladesh. One of them will be population density. Okay, right. So I think it's the most densely populated on the planet, right? All right, and some of the countries that have been talked about scaling up to are in fact very thinly populated, and frankly, I personally don't know that I think they would work in those.
Okay, so and that's such an important lesson to make it not say, oh, it worked here, it will work everywhere, but it has to be. It's often very specific to geography or culture.
Right.
Bob, welcome. So being the evil, oh no, you're not evil, because we actually, I mean, I can say this quite honestly, that of all the multinationals that I respect Unilever the most, and I think you're doing great things, but you're still this global company that wants to dramatically grow at a time where actually other people are saying we need to diminish. So here's this. So what do you gain from this? Is it that you're building your sales, or is it actually that you're reaching your sort of sustainability goals of actually getting messages out to poor people around washing hands and cleaning teeth and so on? What's your motivation?
So I would say, like all private companies, there are usually multiple motivations. So an important one is sales growth, absolutely. So and it'd be foolish to pretend otherwise. What is a thriving, growing distribution channel? Well, a commercial company would be rather daft to ignore that. So, and then a thriving, growing distribution channel that also has positive social impact seems like a no-brainer. So we gain both of those things.
And from the positive social side, because I mean, one of your goals by 2015, I think you're supposed to be reaching 1 billion people around the issue of washing hands, for instance.
Yeah.
And I spoke to your CMO the other day, and you've only reached 200 million. So you've got 800 million to reach in the next 3 years, which is a sort of tough uphill climb. So is this part of that actually when these women go out and sell products, they're also selling a message of health and actually encouraging it? Or actually are they just going out selling products and that's the end of it?
I don't know the specific answer to that question.
So we can ask Nick about that.
But in general terms, the standard corporate social responsibility and marketing messages imploring people to wash your hands, so that's one way to go. Will we meet our billion target that way? You're telling me not. So if there are more engaging ways to do that, then surely we'll follow them.
Okay. And Nick, before I come on to Gavin, what are there's the economic benefit. What are are those women trained to encourage people to wash hands and to actually be more hygienic and to reduce instances of diarrhea, etc., or is it just a sales platform?
This JITA itself is actually a sales, it's a for-profit business selling products in rural Bangladesh. It is operating in Bangladesh. It is not operating in a vacuum, right? It is operating in one of the world's most rapidly developing societies in the sense of the attention the world community and the attention that national community has on trying to move to a middle-income country and become a developed state. Some of the inertia in that relates to many difficult, challenging development issues inside society, inside very poor governance, inside many matters not for today's conversation. But I think in the sense of looking at this business contributing to the not just the empowerment of women and young girls and indeed their families, it's actually about the emancipation of some of the issues around gender and diversity and discrimination in what is one of the most poorest communities in the whole world. Well, the powerlessness of many of the people with whom we are now engaged, with whom for the first time a market with a strong degree of integrity is working with them, listening to them, looking at their aspirations with regard to possibly, as Linda's saying, there are going on without us sort of stock taking, are people buying and selling products inside there. People typically actually carry a big, actually they're bigger than they used to be. There's quite a big hold all of items which they carry. The women, no, the picture's not there, but they're called aparagitas, right? The women carry a whole basket of items door to door, right? Inside there, yes, the intention of the business is not to show someone how to wash their hands, or to, looking at some of the issues.
Sounds like a missed opportunity, though.
No, because there are other programs doing that. No,
okay.
This business. Okay. If you're looking at a socially responsible business, It cannot be, it should not be, I would contest, all things to all people.
So what you're saying is there
all
needs to be very much separation between an NGO traditional purpose, which is sort of educational, and
care. We are
still
working in those communities with other interventions, other engagements, and sitting with community in other ways.
Okay.
This is a business doing
Gavin,
something.
you want to do?
I was going to actually ask Linda, isn't this an example of overburdening something too early on? I mean, one's asking these women or one's encouraging, fostering these women to be entrepreneurs, to sell products to women that haven't had those choices before. I'm not sure many of them want to have a lecture alongside their having their fun interaction with a range of products. I do think that there are some markets reach a stage where you can use them to give messages as well. And we work with hairdressers in Zimbabwe to talk to their clients about female condoms. But this is an established business with a strong client flow through, and anyway, there's a lot of gossip going on anyway, so a message or two thrown in there. But I just wonder whether at this terribly young stage, whether to expect this also to become an instrument of social instruction isn't expecting too much.
As well. I mean, it's one thing to have campaigns of education and so forth, but the fundamentally simple thing that you need for hygiene is a bar of soap, and it's the arrangement of distribution at a cost that allows people to buy a bar of soap. So a bar of soap is actually, a household soap is one of the first manufactured products that people engage with, buy. But it's a sad fact that it's difficult to distribute it. So, so before even the campaign, just having the thing is a starting point.
Okay. Sorry, excuse me. Can you excuse me? Can you just not talk, because it's very disturbing. Thank you. If you want to go outside, that's fine. If you want to hear, stay in. Nick, a broader issue. So there's this whole issue of NGOs have been very traditionally focused on one thing, and now you've got this idea of how NGOs move more into an entrepreneurial space. And you're separating those off. You say, actually, when it gets to a certain stage, you need to actually, it's got a different purpose from what you're currently doing, what the core purpose of an NGO used to be. But is there a movement to the fact that NGOs themselves should become much more entrepreneurial and actually should be making more making money, which they can then plough in? Are we seeing a blurring of boundaries, and is that why you need to separate them off, or is actually a blurring of boundaries actually very useful for change?
That's a very big question. I think the short answer, you can blog on this later. The short answer would be that the world to date has not been able to resolve, the pressing, not just the immediate problems, but the problems of the next generation or two with the current model, right? Now that includes governments, it includes the private sector, it includes non-government, not-profit, and a whole set of other civil society actors. I think one of the things for my organisation as CARE is that we have, and I cannot speak for other NGOs, I suspect that there are not many at this time who would consider that being as progressive and as engaged with the private sector would have, they would be more concerned about some of the consequences of that, as you cite them, in the sense of the lack of experience around those kinds of engagements. I think what we would cite is that actually we have a responsibility, if we are to look at the pressing problems of the 2 to 3 billion people who are currently disengaged from, the future of the world, then we are certainly, as CARE International, we are not going to solve that problem alone. We have an absolute responsibility to work with the private sector, with government, with all stakeholders, to look at new ways to solve some of the problems, to approach some of the problems of engaging, of powerlessness, of extreme poverty, of all the matters that challenges. In rural Bangladesh, these are immense challenges. This is one structured for-profit business that is looking to begin to engage with a disengaged, powerless community of women and men.
So I get it, but why spin it off? Why not say, actually, we're going to hothouse that directly within care? Because actually, as soon as you separate it off, there's the risk, isn't there, that you separate off the knowledge and the skill. But actually, if it's sitting in the NGO, and actually because often change happens inside an organisation, because it's often with even a big company, that a little company, one of their subsidiaries will do something fantastic, and then it will grow into the main body of the beast. So, like Ben & Jerry's with Unilever. Ben & Jerry's had an impact on Unilever. So why don't you keep it inside the NGO and actually use that as an influence to sort of actually change care from the inside?
One of our responsibilities as care is to not keep success as an internal self-congratulatory product.
Well, why does it have to be self-congratulation?
No, it's part of our mission, it's part of our responsibility. If there is something, the same with our colleagues in representing the British government and international development, if there is something that works and works better than what we currently have, we have a distinct responsibility to take that to scale.
Yeah, but why don't you take it to scale within the Linda,
it's not about care.
What do you think about
care.
But in general, what I want to get to is the point of, we're talking about change. We're talking about having to change models. And the NGO sector is one model that also needs to change. And here's an example of an NGO which is actually trying out something very radical and new, but then spinning it off. And all I'm saying is, don't NGOs at the heart of them need to change more towards a more social entrepreneurial sort of vision of themselves?
It would be my general opinion that that's probably, the answer to that is probably yes, just strictly from a sustainability perspective.
Yeah.
I did want to, though, contribute that this policy that CARE has of not holding on to these kinds of things but spending them out was, at least in my experience on the ground, a really important aspect of why this system worked. And the reason was because as long as CARE was not in there with the primary motive of selling product, they could act as an intermediary in between the corporations and the women. These women are extremely disempowered, in many ways demoralized women, and if they had trouble with a distributor, they needed somebody to go in there and advocate for them.
Okay.
If they were having trouble with the local clergy, they needed somebody to go in there and explain what was happening. If somebody, took their money at the end of the day as they were walking home, they needed somebody to intervene and try to set that right. So that it was really, really important that you had this intermediary who was not primarily trying to move product in this particular case.
Okay. Yes.
Just kind of from the overall care perspective, the point you made is exactly right. I mean, we are looking at using some of these models that are for-profit entrepreneurial models to really change what we're doing overall as an organization. But there's also the kind of legalistic reality that we are a not-for-profit organization.
Yeah.
This is a for-profit entity. So we had to actually create a for-profit shell to be able to do our for-profit work. But it's all part of the same organization.
Right, okay.
And we are, as I said briefly in the introductory comments, we see it as having, increasing the toolbox that we have to work with on these development issues. So it's not one or the other. And in fact, one of the, a good example in Bangladesh of another project that we're working on, Shuharda, that showed some of the very things that you talked about, Linda, around women's empowerment and how by empowering women, we were able to have a demonstrative impact, a double-fold decrease in stunting and malnutrition. That combines very well with the same things that we're learning in the JITA project. So we see those things as very much, feeding on themselves, looking at ways in which the whole range of our work is converging. But we do have to have a for-profit entity that allows us to create it. And for the very reasons you said, we don't see this as us keeping and holding on to this. There is the importance of having this kind of intermediary organization as well. But yes, it is helping to change the way we do business.
Okay, Nick, very briefly, because then I want to bring Gavin.
Yeah, surely. Just to sort of emphasize some of this, you mentioned the socially responsible aspects of this business. One of the assurances that we as an organisation and our co-investor seek is in our governance structure for this business is that actually the board, as it is, the governance structure, the board has a set of not just a mission, and as is typical of all boards, but actually we have a set of values and a set of outcomes and impacts, as Linda's describing, that are actually that predicate our engagement in this business. Right now, each board meeting we've had, each subsequent board meeting we sit, and the first item on the agenda of that board meeting is to visit the evidence and the engagements around the social change, the transformative change that this business seeks as its primary directive. Its secondary directive is to do that and make a profit.
Right. Okay. Gavin, what are you doing here? What's DFID sitting up on the platform? No, but seriously, what is the role? Because obviously DFID is changing its model, and it's looking at saying how do you support change? How do you provide catalytic sort of money to create change? And also how do you support the private sector more to create change? How do you fit into this sort of this little universe?
I'm here because I was very kindly invited. DFID, the UK Government Department for International Development, operates under an Act of Parliament, the 2002 International Development Act, which means by law the only thing we can do with our money is reduce poverty. And that is our entire mission. Everything we do is towards that end, and people take us to court if they catch us doing things that aren't to that end. And we believe, and are under the coalition government, that belief has had much more impetus from the top, that working with the private sector and working on the private sector is a fundamental part of poverty reduction. So it's generating or fostering more economic activity where there isn't any. And the problem in most poor parts of the world isn't that there's the wrong sort of business activity, isn't that there's wicked multinationals exploiting people, is that there's no business, there's no jobs. So getting more enterprises, more successful enterprises is a real aim for us. And so there's a whole area of work that we have been developing for some time, but is now getting more impetus, which is about getting more private investment and more successful private enterprise that benefits poor people. But there's another area which I think is very important, and that's on service delivery. Because in most poor countries, poor people buy a good deal of what they consume from the private sector. So they often buy their water from the private sector. They often have to pay for their own schooling. They buy medicines from the corner shop, or they go to an unqualified practitioner. So this whole sort of non-market, non-state delivery of services is an area that we, DFID, and the donor community more broadly has tended to neglect. We sort of think everything should look like the National Health Service, but it doesn't. So I think understanding how markets actually work and trying to make them work better for poor people. I mean, if you want to describe in a sentence what we try and do, it's make markets work better for the poor.
Okay. So one, what comes into my mind as you speak is that, so here's an NGO that's spun off a private business which you've supported, that process. And I would imagine that because it's born out of care, that they'd be more careful about the way they run that private business, and that they make sure that actually profits are shared and that there's a sort of values-based approach. But the risk is, of course, that if you work just with the private sector, which is around profit maximization and sometimes exploitation, that you're actually so this change sounds great, sounds fantastic, but actually on the other side of the equation, the risk is you're actually supporting businesses that, as soon as you turn your eye away, are going to be extremely exploitative.
Yeah, and I think that is a real risk. So commercialization of service delivery, commercialization of sort of populations that are previously outside the market does bear many risks. We look the area where or the sector in which one's seen most of transformation of NGOs into enterprises is microfinance.
Yeah.
So in Latin America, anything 30-40% of financial services to poor people are delivered by organizations that used to be NGOs that have transformed themselves into licensed financial operators, not bank financial institutions. And that has brought risks with it, and there has been a downside. In Andhra Pradesh, we've seen it where you get a market being saturated, you get predatory practices. So there are risks, and we, to the extent that we can be handmaidens of markets growing and being born and being developed, we need to try and lessen those risks. One of the ways we try and lessen those risks is through regulation. So decent regulation of, say, the microfinance sector, decent regulation of selling products that purport to be health products. Thinking about ways that one can use the private sector itself, associations of doctors, nurses, associations of corner stores with kite marks outside saying that they've had a bit of training in selling decent medicines. So I think there are risks. You're right to highlight those risks. I think there are very great risks in poor people being excluded from markets, not being able to participate in sort of the choice, the innovation, the empowerment that markets can bring.
Okay, so before I open it to questions, Bob, I just wanted to come back to you. So just picking up on that point, I know it's not strictly relevant to the exact conversation we're having, but picking on that idea of responsibility. So, you know, Unilever is considered one of the more responsible companies, but what do you see out there that the irresponsible companies are doing that you're not prepared to do?
In terms of distribution?
In terms of this area, yeah. In terms of appropriate products for poor people. Or however you define appropriate, of course, that's a value judgment in itself.
In terms of appropriate products for poor people, well, as a large company, of course, one has to operate with. Well, one consequence of being a large company is you operate with a consistent set of standards for product quality. So, typically, a multinational company's factory and operation and health and safety standards and all of that stuff will be at quite a high level, and usually is setting the pace in terms of the practices in a particular country. So
yep.
If you look at other products that one can buy, then in most countries of the world, a lot of grey market imports, you struggle to find actually where they come from or what's in them. So at the bottom end of the market, you know, variously ineffective or dangerous products that come from who knows where, because you can't tell.
Yeah.
So that I think is the difference between, you know, the best and the worst, if you like. And there's all things in between, and there's many excellent local companies, of course. So of course there are who keep us competitive. But I guess standards.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got, I think, 20 minutes. So yes, gentleman there, and then the lady in front. Can you say who you are and where you're from?
Certainly. My name is Willie Oppenheim. I'm from the United States. I'm a student here at Oxford, pursuing a doctorate in education. And my question is for Professor Scott. I'm just interested about the actual research you did and the impacts you've seen thus far. You mentioned changes in decision-making at the household level. Could you say more about that? And there's a critique that I've heard that basically goes along the lines of, okay, great, now women can choose what color clothes they have, and they can decide how much money to spend on the onions, but the real structural gender inequalities are not being changed. I'm just wondering how you respond to that and what your research has shown.
Much better question than mine, thank you.
It's an odd sort of thing, the way this choice is posed in opposition so consistently, that somehow by empowering women economically, we are by definition ignoring their legal human rights, the legal or human rights. And I don't think that anyone on my team would argue that they should only be shopping, okay? All right? Okay, there is no question that gender is possibly one of the most difficult problems that we have to face in the next century. It is really complex. It will take every one of us pulling on it to get it straight, okay? So, yeah, you're right. At the same time, okay, but from that, in the sense of it's not going to solve the structural big things, although I would also argue that it's a fantasy to think that somewhere along the line, somehow, somebody is just going to sign a document and all the women will be free. I mean, that's just not going to happen, right? That it doesn't work like that. At the same time, I think there's a lots of reasons to think that gradual, never-ending change coming up this way does work pretty well. In history, it has worked pretty well. And some of the feedback that we have in our research are things like, I now feel confident to walk in the village by myself, and I'm therefore better than all the other women, okay? Because I'm free and I don't have to wait for my husband to tell me, okay? Or if I decide that I'm too tired to make dinner, I just go to the bazaar and buy something. And he can't say anything about it. Stuff like that, you know, I mean, and if I want to pay for my children to go to school another year, I can say, I can contribute this money, and therefore I get to help make that decision. So these are really actually, you know, they seem small, but collectively they end up being quite an important thing, I think.
Yes, lady there, and then gentleman next.
Thanks. Camilla Nestor from Grameen Foundation. This is a question for Nick. You mentioned using the board as a way to ensure that both the social goals and the business goals are incorporated into the organization, but I was wondering if you could say a little bit about how you're inculcating both missions or bottom lines into all staff throughout the organization, and particularly something that we struggle with in the social enterprises that we're working on is ensuring that frontline staff are properly incentivized, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you're doing there.
You're with Grameen, yes, indeed. Grameen Danone in Bangladesh is one of our partners in the venture, in the business. The second part of your question first, the whole system and sort of inherent risk in the way the business model is set up relates to commission being transferred from one point of transfer of item through the system until the point of sale. So with regard to you know, the accumulation of large amounts of cash, is this your question? Yeah. The cash is the money and exchange is dispersed throughout the business model on a basis of commission going right through from Unilever delivering a central product to a warehouse to the final sales point in a woman buying from one of the JITAs in front of her homestead. You know, so there is a disbursement of that. The considerably important and pressing issue certainly from our point of view, but also from our co-investor, actually, who I should I'm not sure they're in the room actually, but I should cite as they have invested their own capital, their own equity in this business, and this is Danone Communities. Sitting with them, it is also, as our colleague here from Unilever is saying, it is also looking at, I would say, the private sector taking a move beyond corporate social responsibility, right? If you think about, you often see it drawn as a triangle, actually, and corporate social responsibility is this little bit at the top, right? And then you move down sort of philanthropic, sort of, wonderful moments and the staff are all happy, or whoever the business is. And then actually core business remains largely unchanged by the endeavours of, the Corporate Social Responsibility Office. I think central to the experiences we are having with our partners, our business partners, is the beginning of an understanding that actually business has to change. Not just because, the markets are a little bit further out and we don't understand them and things, but it's actually about the prima facie case for business needs to look at itself and look at its own set of values and responsibilities in an increasingly complex world. Whether it's regard to its diversity of consumers, whether it's regard you've largely ignored women for a very long time and you've sold mostly to men. What are you doing about these other responsibilities you have? Now, you have a responsibility to your shareholders. What we're trying to do in our governance structure is to hold that responsibility, because we are the shareholders as well, actually, but to hold that responsibility in the governance structure, right? Now, its disbursement and its value, its value proposition is indeed a work in progress. It must be with each new colleague, each new woman and man that joins the sales team, that joins the team not selling, but actually back in the warehouse, is looking at actually how we do the training, how we do the engagements, how we deal with the lack of integrity in the police force, in the people who are losing business in their markets, in the little town centre. A place like Bangladesh is one of the most corrupt, with apologies to anybody from Bangladesh in the room, but it is one of the most corrupt societies in the whole world. We are trying to operate a business, a deep penetration into society in that last mile, in that last kilometre, and to do it with integrity. It's hugely challenging.
Okay. Can I just ask someone, what time are we supposed to finish, by the way? Just so I know. Is it 2:30? Okay. So, God, that gives us fun. It's 11 minutes. So just before I go to you, sir, I just want to pick up, because one thing I was going to say Linda, but I now learn I need to call you Professor Scott. So one thing Professor Scott said is that, you have structural change, but also you have, at the end of the day, it's also very personal. So I just want to ask you a very personal question that is within the law to ask, is so if you'd done this, how long have you been in development?
25 years.
25 years. So if you knew what you know now...
25 years ago.
25 years ago, and what would be different in care? So let's say you were running care 25 years ago and you were running it now. What would be the difference from what you've learned personally that would affect the difference of how you would do development?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think a lot of people in this room, we could all visit. I think one of the things that is striking for me is, and what I've been, I hope, able to do, is to start listening to other points of view, actually. There isn't one development model. We have not, in 25 years of my experience, been able to progress development beyond a small set of practitioners engaging with communities around the world. Often coordination is at times of extreme duress, like humanitarian emergency. At other times, we have been less willing, less able, for all sorts of complex reasons, to actually sit together and look at what's working and what's not. I think the change is that people have started to listen to each other. Now, that includes governments, but crucially, I think, it involves the private sector themselves, and it involves NGOs, which are a subset of civil society, right? I think it's transformative. I think it's of recent years. I think this is only in recent times, and I think it is an extraordinarily important time for, this is the Skoll Forum. What year are we in now? Is it year 9, I think? These are, the practitioners, the 900 people here, are some of the only people in the world that are really engaged in different ways of looking at women and men's problems in new ways.
And Gavin, would you agree with? I mean, is this a sort of one-off, or is this something that is sort of, you think, are you seeing it much more across the piece?
I would think that most of us that work in the development profession are seeing quite a lot of questioning of traditional models of doing business. So charities just giving money, DFID giving large amounts of grants. So I think we, the grant givers, are questioning whether we couldn't get more leverage, more value for money, more reach with our grants if we use them in different ways. But also, I think you're seeing new actors coming into the development space. I mean, the entry of Gates into the development space, the entry of the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, and they're coming with social aims as powerful as the ones that drive DFID and CARE, but new ways of doing business. And it's a very, very exciting time, these new, more complicated models.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sorry. Gentleman, then the lady. Did you want to ask a question? Okay.
Thanks very much. Jane Unum with PwC. I actually manage a project director for a DFID program that had provided a bit of support on the program, very much at the end of the sort of cycle we're talking about. So, if you like, what's DFID done for this? I mean, other people have supported the research the Saïd Business School have done, but through this DFID program that we manage, we've helped in a sense with elements of the sort of transition into this new entity. And so there's a question really directed at Nick, but it feels like that there's a couple of stages to the scale points we've discussed. There's scaling up in Bangladesh, which is a big task in itself, before considering going to other parts of the world, and before considering more challenging environments where there's less population density and things like that. My sort of suggestion, thesis, offering up to the discussion is, it would actually be quite difficult for this to scale up in Bangladesh within CARE. And so that's a question, for you, Nick, is that really an option, or does going to scale in Bangladesh mean doing the kind of thing you've done?
I would concur with that. That we made the decision about 2 years ago that if this was going to be a progressive, socially responsible business, then it must be a for-profit entity, and we must separate it from, not because of any inertia in CARE, I hasten to add, but because in its own right it must be able to make its own business decisions and its social engagements and take the responsibility for its actions, but not be encumbered by us thinking about sort of food security and cyclones and other pressing matters. So we're convinced, and I do believe, and I would say this, of course, I do believe we made the right decision.
I think the scaling questions are very interesting. So, from the perspective of a company dealing with distribution networks in all parts of the world, just on a pragmatic point, distribution networks are very variable, of course. So think, and the big companies come a cropper just as much as the small ones. Tesco think they're going to go and imply, all the big retailers come a cropper in different places, and distribution networks are very various and reflect the character, of course, of the countries and societies that they're in. So I think there's two things to scale. So you could think about scaling the model, but it's the relationships that make the model that is the really interesting thing, because applying the same model, it might look a bit different in some other country.
We've got 5 minutes, so quick question here, quick question there, and if we have time for you, sir, but we need to finish on time in order to stay on track. So if you can keep it quick and just say who you are again and where you're from.
Susan Chaffin, I'm the program manager for Business Call to Action. We're housed in UNDP, and we're also funded by DFID in part. And we promote inclusive business initiatives by recruiting and highlighting innovative business models that have both a business and a development impact. So we have a business on the panel, and I wanted to ask, can you just speak more specifically about your experience of collaborating and engaging with NGOs, of leveraging the value chain to reach poor people, and of your motivation? It seems like we gave short shrift, and if Danon were here, I'd ask them the same.
So personally, I'd have to say my history is quite short in this space, but if I try and speak for the company, so I think I would endorse the point that Nick made. So I think people, including companies, are approaching the question of development differently. So it used to be, in the not very recent past, and still to some extent today, that a company like ours would have a large corporate social responsibility budget, and we would find somebody to spend that with, and we'd sign a contract, and that would be it. Similar to the point Gavin's making, I think, and we see quite strongly, and I know that my colleagues are thinking quite carefully now about that, and that isn't actually the best way to engage. So if we can do things that keep our input closer to what we're actually good at, which is creating economic value with appropriate, within appropriate context, I think we think that's the best way to go. So looking for those relationships where we can contribute the things that we're good at, understanding how to create economic value. And distribution, I might say, the economic value in a bar of soap, a significant percentage of that, of course, is in the distribution. A bar of soap in a warehouse is of no value to anybody. So understanding how best to partner in responsible ways. Now, we have to be a bit careful, of course, and we have no interest in being in receipt of funds inappropriately. We need to compete fairly and squarely and earn our money properly. But it does seem, and it seems to be happening all around us, that there are more interesting ways to engage that allow us to behave in ways that we're good at, and do the things that we're good at, and make that contribution, which just kind of seems more intuitively the right way to go. So that's a bit of a general answer.
I'm going to stop you there because time for this one last question. So you, sir.
Hi, I'm Chuck Slaughter from Living Goods, and I know many of you, and I had the pleasure of visiting this program briefly in Bangladesh this summer. I was very impressed with the guy who runs it on the ground there, Saïd. My question goes to something we were talking about at the beginning, which is around product mix. What does the products mix really look like today from an impact point of view? Our feeling at Living Goods is we want to have a positive screen just for products that have an impact on the customer, not just on the livelihood of the agent. That way you have a big sort of leverage effect on your impacts. You're not just affecting the person making money. So where really is the core of the revenue and the profit in the product mix today? Where do you see that going in the future?
Well, I'm going to go to Professor Scott first to answer that, and then Nick very briefly, and then I think we'll need to knock on the head so we can all get to the next sessions.
A substantial majority of the products are Unilever products. The top sellers are mostly some kind of soap. Okay, so back to the question of, are you teaching them to wash their hands? Well, you can't. It doesn't matter if you teach them if they don't have soap. It's some kind of soap is mostly. Toothpaste as well is in there. Once again, I do want to emphasize that we don't really know a lot of what's getting sold because these women are putting in locally produced goods, and that is likely to turn out to be a significant amount of what's being sold. I will say that I personally feel, and I've visited Living Goods also, that the flexibility of this basket, not trying to enforce those moral judgments, not trying to control it for what the West sees as good or bad, is one of the reasons why it works. And on top of it, for the women to be able to choose what's in that basket is one of the reasons why it works. We do a little thing there we call bag checks from time to time. It's my favorite part of the research, where we just ask the lady randomly, can we see what's in your bag? And it's fun. And you can tell one of the reasons it works is because the opening of the bag, it's like Christmas, okay? Because they have all this stuff that these guys have put in there, but they'll have stick-on bindies and they'll have hair ornaments. And my very favorite was a strawberry condom. And they bring in contraceptives, all kinds of stuff that might otherwise be difficult or embarrassing for them to get. So I guess that I'm just saying, I personally think this is one of the things that makes this not only sustainable, but nice.
I'm not going to let you have the last word, Nick, because Professor should always have the last word, I'm told. So I think we will wrap it up there, but I just want to say, because I came completely unprepared, and now I feel that I'm ready now to start the session and ask you some good questions. So that's been very good for me. So can I just ask us all to thank the panel for coming?